Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today is going to be a little bit different. If you have been around here before, you know that we typically talk about routines, decluttering, meal planning, and budgeting. But I wanted to take a little bit of time to tell you about my story and my 3 different experiences with feeding my 3 different children. I honestly went back and forth for quite a while before I filmed this video on whether or not I wanted to share this story, especially sharing it on the internet. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it is really important for other moms to hear different stories when it comes to breastfeeding. When I was struggling with feeding with each of my babies, I would look on YouTube for different ideas and tips and tricks for how to be able to feed them better and less painfully, and how to just have breastfeeding work for us. And over again, I came across advice that I now think is dangerous. A lot of people said, if you just stick with it, you can do it. If you just keep going, you and your baby will figure it out. And if you just don't give your baby any other options, they will eventually learn to breastfeed. While I think that advice might be wonderful for some moms and some babies, for other moms and babies, it could be very detrimental. If you are new to my channel, I'm Kassy and I have 3 children. My oldest daughter is 7.5, which is just crazy to me. I can't believe that she is on her way to being 8 already. My second daughter is 4.5 and my son is 9 months old. Since I am just wrapping up the weaning process, I figured this would be a good time to sit down and film everything while it is still fresh in my mind. Now, if you are expecting a baby, I actually recommend that you don't watch this video because I don't want to put into your head different scenarios that might go wrong and kind of scare you out of trying to breastfeed. Because I know a ton of people that have had wonderful breastfeeding experiences, and it can be such a great thing when it works well for both mom and baby. So if this is you, you can check out pretty much any other video on my channel, and I have a lot of helpful advice for moms. But if you are looking specifically for breastfeeding advice, I am not your girl, because that has always been a struggle for me, as I will talk about in this video. This video is mainly going to be for moms who are breastfeeding, who are having some struggles, and they are kind of just trying to figure out if they should continue going or not. Obviously, you will have to be the one that decides what is best for you and your baby, if you should continue or not. But sometimes it can help to hear a different side of the story when so many people are telling you, just keep going, just keep doing it, and everything will work out. And I'm also going to tell you in this video which ways were easy to feed my child and which way was incredibly difficult. Now, just a disclaimer here, I am very pro breastfeeding. I think it is wonderful, and I think if it's working out for you, you should continue doing it as long as you can and you want to keep going. Before I had my kids, I thought I would only breastfeed and I would never ever use a bottle. I remember getting a bottle at a baby shower and thinking, I am never going to use this. But I was so thankful that somebody had gotten me a bottle, even though I hadn't registered for one, because I ended up needing it quite a lot, especially with my second and third child. Now, another disclaimer here is I am not a medical person. In fact, I'm less than not a medical person. I have a lot of friends and family members that are medical people, and whenever they're talking, I'm always sitting there thinking, I don't know what you're saying. Can you explain this to me as you would explain it to a child? So this is not supposed to be construed as any sort of medical advice. I am, however, going to have a friend on the channel in a couple of weeks who is a nurse, and she agreed to come on my channel and kind of do a Q&A where I can ask her questions about how to make sure your baby is getting enough food and different questions about feeding your baby, because I am very passionate about this topic, especially with all the struggles that I personally have had with it. So if you want to make sure that you catch that video, be sure you subscribe and ring the bell next to that subscribe button so you can be notified when it's out. All right, let's go ahead and get into this. So I'm just going to start with my first experience with my first baby, then I will do the second baby, and then I will do the third. So with my first baby, like I already mentioned, I was very certain that this was going to work out wonderfully for us and there wouldn't be any issues. I mean, what could be more natural than breastfeeding? And since people had been doing it for thousands of years, I figured, what could go wrong? Well, to start off, I don't think anyone had prepared me for how painful breastfeeding can be. Now, I don't say this next part to brag or anything like that, but just to show you how incredibly painful breastfeeding was for me personally. I am very much an internalizer when it comes to pain. I can be in a lot of pain and people around me won't necessarily know about it. And I know this because I've had all 3 of my babies at home, and I have been told, wow, we did not realize you were as far progressed as you were. We figured we'd be waiting around quite a bit longer for the baby to show up because I didn't show them that I was in pain the way they traditionally see it. Now, I'm not saying that birth was painless for me. I have heard some people say that and I just can't even fathom it. I'm just saying that I was able to internalize the pain in such a way that the people around me weren't aware of exactly how much pain I was in. But when it came to breastfeeding for me, I told my husband over and over again, I would rather give birth many, many times over than to have to breastfeed. I was in so much pain, and I would try to tell people that it really hurts. I am in a lot of pain. And I would get one of 2 different responses. One would be, oh, it's supposed to hurt. It hurts for a while and then you build up calluses and you're good. But then lactation consultants would tell me it's really not supposed to hurt, and if it hurts, you probably don't have a correct latch. So let's work on the latch a little bit. And we would work on it and we would try, and then they would say, well, it seems like it's not too bad. Maybe it's just uncomfortable because you don't really act like you're in pain. Now, during the lactation consultant sessions, she was able to figure out that the baby had a tongue tie and potentially a lip tie. But she told me if it wasn't causing too much pain or problem, that I didn't need to worry about it. We only needed to take care of it as long as the baby wasn't getting enough food. And by doing pre and post nursing weights, she was actually taking in a lot of food. So I wasn't too worried about it, and I figured what some people were telling me, where you just have to kind of build up calluses and then everything will be fine. So I waited, and then I waited some more. Now, before I go on, if there's anybody on here who gets grossed out by blood or medical things, you may want to skip ahead, because I know I am grossed out by those types of things and I hate it when people just talk about it without giving me a warning. So go ahead, skip ahead. I'll put a timestamp and just skip to the next one. There aren't any other gross things that I can think of. If there are, I'll let you know and we'll skip ahead at that point. Now, for any of you that are still here, it got to the point where I would feed my baby and then she would spit up what looked like Pepto-Bismol all over the room. And I'll let you fill in the blanks for what that means. And it was not good. I was in so incredibly much pain. I would sometimes be feeding her in our bed and I would wake my husband up accidentally because I would be just sobbing with the pain. It was so painful. And one night I woke him up and he was like, this is crazy, I'm gonna get the formula. We had received from Similac and Enfamil, they send you these nice little samples, and again I thought, I'm never gonna use those, it's fine. But we kept them, and I was really glad that I had, because we grabbed the formula, we're able to feed her, and I was able to get a little bit of a break. I realized at that point that I needed to get the lip and tongue tie fixed. Now, if you have a child that needs to have a lip or tongue tie revised, as they call it, make sure you go to somebody who specializes in pediatrics. And this was something that I did not know, and I still regret not knowing to this day. I went to a regular ENT because the person that the lactation consultant recommended was out of town, and our pediatrician, who also knows how to do this, was out of town. So I just went to anybody that I could find who said they knew how to do this for infants. And they had me hold her on my lap, hold her arms down like a little straitjacket on my lap as they were doing the lip and tongue tie. And as somebody who doesn't even want to hear about blood in different situations and who is very unfamiliar with medical things in general, it was absolutely terrifying. It was easily the most traumatic experience of my adult life. And I really thought that my baby was going to die on my lap because she was just gargling on her own blood, and it seemed to take so incredibly long. The only way that I kept myself from grabbing her and picking her up was I wasn't looking. I couldn't look, and I didn't know where the knife was, and I didn't want to cause any more damage. That was the only thing where I kept telling myself I can't pick her up because I don't want to hurt her in any other way. Finally, they were finished and they were like, okay, you can pick her up. And I picked her up on my shoulder, and she had blood all over her mouth. And she cried 2 or 3 more times, and then she just passed out. And it was so scary. And the medical team basically just walked out of the room at that point. And it was so awful. And I told my husband that day, he had asked, do you want me to go with you? And I said, no, I'll be fine. My mom was able to go with me, which I'm so glad for. And she was able to drive me home because I don't think I could have driven home. But eventually she kind of woke up and was able to nurse. And that night I was so worried because it sounded like she had just swallowed and inhaled so much blood that I slept with her up on my chest. I kind of propped myself up. I actually went and slept in the room with my mom because my husband's a really deep sleeper, and I was so afraid that something was going to happen. I wanted somebody else who could wake up with me if I needed to, and be there while I was nursing her and just kind of help be support for me, because I felt just so shaken. I was shaking and just terrified that something was going to happen to her. Now, in the days following the frenotomy or frenectomy, I can't remember the proper way of saying that, it was very painful because it was like starting over again, and she had to relearn how to nurse. I had to get new calluses, basically. It was just a very painful process. But I knew that if I kept going, it should be better at this point because it was fixed and she should be able to get a better latch. And we already had known that she was getting plenty to eat. So I wasn't worried about her gaining weight. She was doing just fine at all of her doctor's checkups, and it was just a matter of me being uncomfortable. So eventually we were able to work it all out, and I actually was able to breastfeed her for 9.5 months, I think it was, before I weaned her. And then she was just able to go straight to solid foods and almond milk at that point. We never ended up having to do formula, which was really nice, and it was just a really easy process. So once I got through all of the difficulties with breastfeeding at the beginning, this was actually one of the easiest ways to feed my child. It was very convenient. I didn't have to bring anything else with me, just myself. But it did have a drawback, and that was that I had to be with her to feed her. I couldn't give a bottle to my husband and leave and go out for the evening. I had to be around whenever she needed to eat. Yes, I could have pumped during that time, but I didn't actually have a great pump at this point, and it was a real hassle to have to sit down and pump. So that was the one drawback to this, but definitely breastfeeding, if it is working, is one of the easiest ways to feed your baby if you have this option. Now, I started with that story because a lot of the advice that I heard when I was looking for help this time with getting the little guy to go back to breastfeeding after I had been exclusively pumping was just keep going and it will work no matter what. And if I had only had that first experience, I would have probably said the same thing. But I didn't only have that first experience. And that leads me to the next story, which was with my second child. Now, before I even had my second baby, I was already in contact with the lactation consultant, again, the same one, because she's really amazing. She will come to your house, and she has a lot of really good relationships with the pediatric people who will do the tongue and lip ties in our area. So I was already in touch with her saying, hey, as soon as this baby is born, basically, can I be in touch with you and you come to my house and assess whether she has a tongue or a lip tie as well. Now, the doctor we knew that we wanted to see this time because we didn't want to repeat the experience we had with the first. He only will see you and perform the frenectomy or frenotomy if you have had a lactation consultant say that there is a tongue or a lip tie and that it is affecting breastfeeding. So the day my second daughter was born, as soon as I tried breastfeeding her, I knew. Hey guys, so I am editing this video and I realized that I didn't explain why it was clear right away that she had a tongue tie. And it was because we tried to get her to latch and she was actually unable to latch. We tried everything that the midwives could think of to get her to latch and start feeding, and eventually they said, okay, you need to just pump and get this baby some food. She actually had the worst tongue tie of all three of them, so we had to give her pumped milk or formula until day 3, I think it was, when we got that tongue tie released. I want to get a lactation consultant here and I want to get rolling on that process. So I believe we were able to get in and get the tongue and lip tie revised around day 3. And it was such a night and day experience to the experience that we had the first time. It was quick, it was easy. They actually took her out of the room and took care of everything, and then they brought her back to us. And it was so fast and easy. I just thought that they had forgotten to have us sign something when they came back in, because it was almost too fast, and she wasn't even crying at all. So again, if you have to have this done for any reason, make sure you go to somebody who specializes in pediatrics. Now, since this was not my first rodeo, I figured it would be exactly the same as the first time. It would be a little bit more painful right at first, and then it would get easier, and I would be able to breastfeed her hopefully until that 9-ish month mark like I had with my first. Well, everything seemed to get better, except for the fact that my baby was crying so much. And we had been told often with our first that we were just lucky, because she was a very happy baby from the minute she was born. The first thing that we were told about her was not if she was a boy or a girl, but that it had dimples, because she was literally born smiling. So we were told many times that you are lucky, your next child is going to make up for this. So we kind of figured that's what was happening. She was just a grumpy child, and she was just different than her sister. And we were okay with that. We weren't too worried about it. We just figured, well, babies cry, and we just got lucky the first time. Well, I didn't think too much of this until she was about 4 months old, and I had a friend watch her for the day so I could do some work. And at the end of the day, he told me, yeah, it went great. She drank 4 ounces and then slept for 4 hours. And I was kind of shocked, because I could never get her to sleep more than 30 minutes during the day. But I still didn't think too terribly much of it, because whenever his wife worked and he had their kids for the day, she said he always did the same thing. He was always able to get the kids to nap way longer. And so it was kind of just this joke that, well, he can get the kids to nap and we can't. Well, the next week, my mom watched the baby, and she said the exact same thing. Yeah, it was great. She drank 4 ounces and then slept for 4 hours. So I kind of started wondering if maybe I was having a supply problem. And sure enough, I was. Apparently, she was not as efficient with breastfeeding as her sister was, and what she was essentially doing is kind of using me as a pacifier, and wasn't actually eating that much while at the breast. And I know this because when I started pumping, I was getting almost nothing. So after this second time, I decided to try just following a feeding with a bottle and just seeing, is she satisfied? Is something going on here? So I did that, and she was not supposed to be eating a ton at that time. I want to say it's 2 to 4 ounces. If you know, leave that in the comments down below. But it's not a ton that their tummy is supposed to be able to handle when they're 4 months old. Well, I would nurse her and then give her a bottle, and she would want to drink so much more than that amount. And if we would try to take the bottle away from her, even once it was completely empty, she would just scream and hang on to the bottle for dear life. So I realized that she obviously was not getting enough food. And at her next checkup that we went to, sure enough, she had dipped in her weight. And what the lactation consultant told me this time around with my third baby, she said, once you see the dip, it's usually been going on for quite a while. Like, you don't see the dip and then there's a problem. There's a problem for a little while, and then you see the dip. So I decided with my second, I would go up to my mom's and I would spend the week, and my mom basically took care of everything. She would feed the kids, she would do everything they needed, she put them to bed, and I sat on the couch and I pumped for pretty much an entire week. And I would pump for about an hour, and I would get about an ounce. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just keep doing this while I'm here. By the time we leave, we should be good. And nothing changed. So I realized I cannot be a good mom to my kids if I am needing to pump 24/7. And especially since I had an older daughter too. If I just had the one baby at this time, I may have been able to do it a little bit longer, because when she was napping, I could have had that time to pump. But with 2, and my older one was just about 3 at this time, she needed my attention. She needed us to be able to go to the park so she could get her energy out. And that's just not doable when you are pumping all the time. So it was a really hard decision for me to make, and I had a lot of guilt about weaning her so early. But thankfully for me, I had an amazing community of other moms around me, and they started giving me all of the samples that they had gotten of their formula. And I actually had 2 friends who had weaned their babies right around this time, and they both had freezer stashes, and they gave us everything in their freezer stash that they had left. And that was just such an amazing gift to be able to still give her some breast milk. And then she continued to have formula until she was about 14 months old. Because I wasn't in any hurry to wean her, I didn't care since it had nothing to do with me, and she really loved having a bottle. And I also just really liked having the special cuddle time with her since I hadn't been able to breastfeed her. Now, even though I felt a lot of guilt about having to give her formula, I ended up kind of loving this way of feeding my baby because I was able to go ahead and start working out again. I have something where I can't work out when I'm breastfeeding a baby, otherwise my milk supply will drop. So I was excited to be able to kind of get my body back to where I wanted it, to start working out again, and to just have a little autonomy again. The other thing I loved about the formula is anybody can feed the baby. I didn't have to be around for it, and I didn't have to pump or do anything extra if I wanted to go out for the evening. Now, the drawback to the formula, obviously, is this is the most expensive way to feed your baby. Not only do you need the formula itself, but you also need things like bottles and drying racks to be able to feed the baby. Now, this brings me to the baby that I currently have, and I am currently just about done weaning. Once again, because of all of the issues we had had with the first 2, I was in contact with the lactation consultant before he was even born. After he was born, I tried to nurse, and I immediately recognized that he had a tongue tie again. So I didn't make it clear again, and the way that we knew immediately that he needed to get his tongue tie fixed as well was the exact same thing that had happened with my second child. He tried and tried to latch and to nurse, and he was just not able to because he couldn't stick his tongue out far enough. So we did the same thing with him. We gave him pumped milk and formula until we were able to get that tongue tie released. So we got in touch with the lactation consultant, had her come, and as we were kind of explaining everything that had happened after we had seen her with both of the girls, she said, I really want you to keep pumping this time. I want you to pump as much as you possibly can in the beginning, just to make sure that everything is working out. She said you can always stop later if you don't need to, but it's really hard to get your supply back once you have already lost it. Now, after she did the before and after weights with him, we realized he was only transferring about 1/3 of the amount that a newborn baby should transfer. So she knew immediately, yes, you need to get this taken care of. It is obviously affecting the breastfeeding. And she could also tell by looking in his mouth, yes, he needs to have his tongue fixed. So thankfully we were able to get in with the same people who had done the second tongue tie, and we got that taken care of again within the first week. He was very little when we got it taken care of, but I thought, great, this is going to work this time. We're all ready. We're all set. I'm going to be pumping, make sure my supply is good. And we also decided to, with him, go ahead and give him a bottle every single time he ate. We wanted to make sure from the get-go he was getting enough food and everything was looking good. So I would breastfeed him, and then I would pump while my mom or my husband would give him a bottle. And sometimes he would eat a lot from the bottle, and sometimes he wouldn't eat very much. And I figured this was fine. I figured sometimes he was probably getting more from me, and it really encouraged me every time he wasn't eating too much from the bottle. When he had his 2-week checkup, everything looked fantastic. The doctor said he's more than gained his birth weight back, which is all we look for in those first couple weeks. And everything looks really good. If he's eating well, just go ahead and keep doing what you're doing, and we will see you at the 2-month appointment. Now, I had noticed him getting a little fussier, but again, we had been told so many times with our first that we were just lucky that she wasn't fussy, and most babies are fussy. So we kind of just thought, well, he'll be a little bit fussier of a baby, and that's okay. So since he was gaining weight really well, over the next couple of weeks, I decided I wanted to try to exclusively breastfeed him. I would still give him a bottle, but I started giving him less bottle and just letting him spend as much time breastfeeding as he wanted to. And he spent a lot of time breastfeeding. He wanted to just breastfeed and breastfeed and breastfeed, and I kind of figured, you know what, this is good, give him practice, give me practice. And with the other two, I had been in just so much pain that I had tried to do it as quickly as possible, and I thought maybe that's why the second one had struggled. Maybe I hadn't given her enough time. So with him, I decided I am going to just give him as much time as he wants, and let him really try to nurse. So he would spend a lot of time eating. He would nurse and nurse and nurse and nurse and nurse and nurse and nurse, and then I'd switch sides and he would do that again, and then we would give him a bottle, and he just spent so much time eating. But then when he would be done eating, he would still be fussy. So we kind of thought, well, he's got to be tired or something, because there's no way he can still be hungry after all of this time eating. When he was 4 weeks old, I had a midwife checkup. And one of the things I love about midwives is every time you have a checkup after the baby's born, they also check on your baby. They weigh your baby, they ask you a whole bunch of questions about them, and just ask you if everything is going well. So I took him with me to the appointment, and we realized at the appointment that he had not even gained an ounce since his 2-week checkup. And the midwife started asking me all these questions, how are his pees and poops? And I said, well, I think they're good. I mean, I'm changing his diaper every time he eats, and there's always something in there. And she said, okay, that's really strange that he's not gaining weight, but he's having enough pees and poops. And she said, I want you to call his pediatrician. So on the drive home, I didn't actually call the pediatrician. Instead, I called my sister, who is a pediatric nurse. And I called her up and I said, I don't know what to do. I am feeding this baby all the time, and he is just not gaining weight. And I feel like I'm doing everything. I mean, I'm pumping, I'm nursing, and we're giving him the pumped milk, and he's nursing every single time he eats, and he's not gaining weight. I don't know what to do. She said, that's not good. She said, I'm gonna come up tomorrow. And amazingly, her husband, who's a doctor, actually had the day off as well. And she said, we're all gonna come up tomorrow, her family. And my husband and I were kind of like, oh, you don't have to do that. It's a long drive. We can figure it out. She said, we may need to change bottles. We may need to do, she started giving me all these ideas. I said, we can do that. You don't have to come. And she said, no, I'm going to come. That's actually pretty scary that that's happening, and I want to help you figure this out. And then after I got off the phone with her, I actually called a pediatrician friend of mine, a good friend of my dad's that I've grown up with, and kind of told him the same thing and said, I don't really know what to do. So my sister and the pediatrician both told me I needed to do a few things to get through the night. The first thing I needed to do was to not feed him constantly. I needed to only feed him every 3 hours and only for 30 minutes during his feeding time. I wasn't just supposed to let him feed as long as he wanted to, but to give him a specific amount of time. And they said that will make him more engaged in the eating process and make sure he's actually eating and not just sucking. Apparently what can happen is that a baby is actually burning more calories than they are taking in, which I had never even known this was a possibility at all. So I was so glad that they were able to give me this advice. After I had talked with them, it was time to feed him again. And as I sat there feeding him, he was just not interested at all. In the 30-minute time, he only took half an ounce, which was not enough. And I decided to instead take a syringe and feed him with my finger, putting my pinky in his mouth for him to suck on, and just using a syringe to get more into his mouth. And as I was feeding him with my pinky in his mouth, I could just feel that his suck was so weak. I could just feel his little tongue barely, it felt like just barely brushing up against my pinky, and he was getting so weak already, and I felt so awful that I had not noticed this. And if I had not had that midwife appointment that day, I probably would have just put him to bed if he wasn't eating, because I would have thought he was tired. I would have had no idea, because he had been spending so much time eating. It wouldn't have even crossed my mind that he was hungry. And I still feel so guilty about that, and am just so thankful every day that we had midwives who figured that out, and I had people around me who were able to help me figure it out as well. So all through the night, I set timers, and I didn't even try giving him the bottle anymore because I knew he wasn't eating well with that. And I would get up, I would put him up on my knees, and I would sit there with my pinky in his mouth, and I would give him the syringe. My wrist was so tired by the next day, but I didn't care as long as he was getting food. And right around 9 a.m., I was feeding him, I got done, and I just felt so exhausted. I was about in tears again just because I hadn't slept all night and I didn't know what to do and I was really nervous. And right then my sister came in. And I just felt this huge sense of relief that she was here and she could help me. So since she's a pediatric nurse, she brought a whole arsenal of bottles, and she said sometimes what happens is they just aren't eating well from one bottle. Or sometimes, like in our case, what might have happened is when they are a third or a fourth child and the bottle has been used and used and used, the hole in the nipple will actually get bigger and it will drip. So instead of sucking, they will just sit there, let the milk drip, and then they will swallow. So she said you actually don't want a very used nipple. So she immediately, even though he had just ate, she said, let's put some pump milk in this bottle and just see what happens. And he immediately ate a full feeding and seemed satisfied. By the end of the day, he was acting so much more alert and happier, more content. And I just felt so horrible that I hadn't noticed that he was hungry. But when you're sitting there with them every single day and you feel like you're feeding them all the time, sometimes it doesn't even cross your mind that that may be what they need. And even though he was my third baby, and I'd probably been told this before, sometimes when you're super sleep deprived and your doctor is telling you things to look for and to do, it doesn't register in the long term, unfortunately. But I had never known that if you feed a baby and they're still having their hands clasped, especially if they have them up by their face, that they're still hungry. I didn't know that they were supposed to relax their hands when they were done eating. I also didn't know that their skin can be a little saggy when they aren't getting enough food. I had noticed that his skin was saggy. I had even joked that he looked like a little Shar-Pei puppy. And I thought it was just a cute little thing that was different. But it turns out that is actually a sign of dehydration or hunger. And the last thing that I did not realize, that everyone kept asking me the right questions, but I was giving them the wrong answer, is when they say, is your baby having enough wet diapers? They mean a full, heavy wet diaper. Not just was there blue on the diaper. And I just thought, well, as long as there's some blue, that's a wet diaper, right? So he had been peeing some, but not nearly enough to be getting enough fluids. And I also didn't realize there was something called starvation pooping, where they will start pooping a whole bunch. And he had been doing that. He had been pooping and pooping and pooping. So when I was asked, well, is he peeing and pooping? I would say, well, yeah, he is. Not realizing that they actually are kind of two different things, and just because they're having a lot of poops doesn't mean they're getting enough fluid. After that day with my sister, we figured out that he obviously was not eating enough from me, and he needed to be having the pumped milk in a bottle. So I spent the next 4 months exclusively pumping and continuing to try to breastfeed, because I figured that would be so much easier than having to try to breastfeed, pump, and then bottle feed him. It just takes so much time. And I know before I had him, I had even made the comment, well, if it doesn't work, I'll just pump. Pumping is a full-time job, and especially when you have 2 other kids that need your love and attention, it is so hard. And people who have never had to full-time pump just don't have a concept of how incredibly hard that is. But I was so tired. I was so emotionally spent. And I think the reason I was able to keep going so long is that everyone around me gave me permission to quit if I wanted to. My husband, my midwives, my family, everyone told me, you know, it's okay if you don't want to do this anymore, if you want to do formula. And then once he was 5 months old, I was actually able to breastfeed with the addition of adding in some solid food. And I am glad that I was able to do it. But when I would watch these videos and hear these moms saying, well, I did it, so I know that you can do it too, I would always think to myself, you don't know. You don't know if my baby will ever be able to effectively transfer milk from me. You can't guarantee that. And saying that can kind of give people some false hope. So yes, it worked for me, but maybe it would take your baby 6 months or 8 months. And you don't know if you'll be able to commit to pumping or whatever you are doing for that time. And it's okay if you don't want to. And another thing I heard a lot that I think is actually a really dangerous and scary thing to say to moms is, if you just don't give your baby another option, they will learn to breastfeed. And that just isn't true. And I know this from my personal story. If I had only given him the option to breastfeed and I hadn't had midwives who caught that he wasn't gaining weight, I honestly don't think he would still be here. And that is a terrifying thought, that some moms are hearing this and thinking, oh, well, I just need to not give them the option of the bottle. Like I said at the beginning, I will be having a friend on this channel here in a couple of weeks, and she's going to be talking about making sure your baby is getting enough food and how to make sure that breastfeeding is working well for you. But in the meantime, I just wanted to give you some encouragement that if you feel like breastfeeding isn't working for you for one reason or another, it is okay if you need to feed your baby a different way. And the most important thing to keep in mind when you are feeding your baby is that your baby is getting enough food. And the second most important thing, I think, is to make sure that this is working for your health, your physical health, and your mental health. You can be an amazing mom no matter how you feed your baby.